We shouldn't be doing this.
Shh. No one has to know.
The blood on Yoon Sung's shirt was still wet when they carried him through the servants' entrance, unconscious and pale as death. Zara Brooks pressed herself against the kitchen wall as his men rushed past, their expensive suits torn and faces grim with the kind of fear she'd never seen from the organization that controlled half of Seoul. "Is he?" Kwon, she started to ask, but Park Dong-ho, his right hand, cut her off with a look that could have frozen fire. "You saw nothing. You know nothing. Clean the blood from the marble and forget this happened." She nodded and reached for the mop, but her hands were shaking. 5 years of working in this mansion had taught her to be invisible, to move through rooms like a shadow, to never ask questions about the men who came and went at all hours. But she'd also learned to read the signs of real danger, and tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the end of something. The attack had happened at the harbor. One, she'd heard fragments of frantic phone calls, seen the way trusted lieutenants avoided eye contact, felt the electricity of a house where power had suddenly become uncertain. Someone had tried to kill Yoon Sung, and from the blood trail leading to the private elevator, they'd almost succeeded. As she cleaned crimson drops from white marble, Zara found herself wondering if he would survive. She shouldn't care. He was dangerous, ruthless, the heir to an empire built on violence and fear. But in 5 years of invisible service, she'd also seen moments when he thought no one was watching. The way he'd quietly covered medical bills for a guard's sick daughter, how he'd never once raised his voice to the staff, even when others demanded he show more authority, the tired sadness in his eyes when he thought he was alone. Maybe that's why, when Dong-ho found her 3 hours later, she didn't hesitate. "He's asking for you." "Hey, before we dive deeper, let me know where you're listening from tonight." Stories like this need witnesses who understand that some boundaries are worth crossing. For me, Zara set down the silver she'd been polishing. "I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake! 3rd floor, private wing." "And Brooks?" Dong-ho's voice carried a warning. "Whatever you see up there, whatever condition he's in, you keep your mouth shut." The elevator ride felt endless. Zara had never been above the 2nd floor, never entered the family's private quarters. When the doors opened, she stepped into a hallway that felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. Heart worth more than she'd make in a lifetime. Carpet so thick her footsteps were silent. Air that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and leather. The bedroom door was heavy mahogany, slightly open. She knocked softly. "Come in." His voice was rough, strained. When she pushed the door open, the sight of him made her breath catch. Yoon Sung sat propped against silk pillows, shirtless, his chest wrapped in white bandages already seeping red. His black hair was disheveled, his usually perfect composure replaced by the raw vulnerability of someone who'd stared death in the face.
"You came!" he said, and she heard surprise in his voice, as if he hadn't expected her to answer his summons.
"You asked for me." She stayed by the door, uncertain. "Sir." "Just Jae-sung. Tonight, just my name." He tried to shift position and winced. "The doctor left pain medication, but I can't reach the table. Would you?" She moved quickly to the bedside, retrieving the bottle of pills and a glass of water from the nightstand. As she handed them to him, their fingers touched briefly, and she felt the calluses on his hands. Not the soft palms of someone who'd never worked, but the roughness of someone who'd fought for everything he had. "Thank you." He took the medication, then looked at her directly for the first time. "You're not afraid of me?" It wasn't a question. Zara considered lying, giving the answer that would be safest, but something in his eyes made her honest. "I should be." "But you're not." "No." She studied his face, searching for signs of the cold calculation she'd heard others describe. Instead, she saw pain and exhaustion and something that looked almost like loneliness.
"You've never given me reason to be." Jae-sung was quiet for a long moment.
"My own captains wouldn't come to this room tonight. Too worried about being seen with a leader who might not survive until morning. But you came." "You're not going to die!" "How do you know?" Because the thought of it makes something twist in my chest, she didn't say. Because in 5 years of watching you from the shadows, I've seen your strength, and it's not the kind that breaks easily. Because you're too stubborn, she said instead, and was rewarded with a small smile that transformed his entire face. My father would agree with that assessment. The smile faded. He's flying back from Tokyo tonight. There will be discussions about leadership, about whether I'm still fit to run the organization. Are you? The question surprised them both. She hadn't meant to ask it, hadn't meant to treat him like someone whose vulnerability she could acknowledge openly. I don't know, he said finally. Tonight was supposed to be routine, a simple meeting with the harbor managers. Someone leaked the details, knew exactly where we'd be, exactly how many guards I'd have. It was an inside job, betrayal from within his own organization, the worst kind of wound, and the most dangerous. Do you know who? Ha! I have suspicions, but suspicions aren't enough. I need proof, and I need to heal first. He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin warm. I need someone I can trust, absolutely. Someone whose loyalty can't be bought or threatened or turned. The implication hung in the air between them. He was asking her to stay, to help him through recovery while enemies circled and allies showed their true colors. It would mean abandoning her, carefully maintained invisibility, stepping into the dangerous world of mafia politics and power struggles. It would be inappropriate, she said softly. Yes. And dangerous. Yes. And if anyone found out, you'd be the first to pay for it. His voice was matter of fact, acknowledging the reality without trying to minimize it. I wouldn't blame you for saying no. Zara looked around the opulent room, at the man who controlled an empire from silk sheets and mahogany furniture. She thought about her small apartment in Hongdae, the simple life she'd built on the edges of his dangerous world. Staying meant risking everything for someone who might not survive the week. But she also thought about 5 years of watching him carry the weight of an organization he'd inherited, not chosen. About the loneliness she recognized because she felt it too. About the way he'd said, "Just my name," like he was desperate to be seen as human rather than symbol. "I'll stay," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, so profound, it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you." She pulled the armchair closer to his bed. "But we're going to establish some rules." "Rules?" "I'm here to help you recover, nothing more. I take care of your medical needs, bring your meals, help you communicate with people you trust, that's all." "Understood. And when you're better, when this crisis passes, I go back to my regular duties. We pretend this never happened." "Of course." But even as they agreed to the boundaries, Zara could feel something electric in the air between them, a tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the way he was looking at her, not like a servant, but like a woman, like someone he wanted to know, to understand, to touch. "Get some sleep," she said, standing quickly. "I'll be in the sitting room if you need anything." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Zara?" She turned back, surprised to hear her name on his lips. "I know what I'm asking of you. I know the risk. If you change your mind..." "I won't!" The conviction in her own voice surprised her, but as she settled into the sitting room to keep watch through the night, she realized it was true. Whatever was happening between them, whatever dangerous territory they were entering, she wasn't going to run. Even if she should. By morning, news of the attack had spread through Seoul's underworld like wildfire. Zara brought Jae-sung breakfast and the morning papers, all of which speculated about the future of the Yoon organization. The headlines were carefully worded, but their meaning was clear. A wounded leader was a weak leader, and weakness invited challenges. "Your father's plane landed an hour ago," she reported, setting the tray on his lap. "Dong-ho says he'll be here by 10. Jae-sung nodded, but she could see tension in his shoulders. His relationship with his father was complicated. Respect mixed with resentment, duty tangled with the desire to prove himself worthy of an inheritance he'd never asked for. "Help me get dressed," he said. "Something formal. I can't meet him looking like an invalid." She hesitated. They'd maintained careful boundaries through the night. She'd helped him to the bathroom, changed his bandages, brought him medication, but always with clinical efficiency. Getting him dressed would require touching him, being closer than either of them had acknowledged they wanted. Zara? Of course. What would you like to wear? She selected a black shirt and expensive slacks from his walk-in closet, returning to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, bare-chested, and trying to hide how much the movement had cost him. The bandages need to be changed first, she said, avoiding his eyes as she gathered fresh gauze and medical tape. The bleeding has stopped, but the dressing is saturated. He nodded and held still as she began unwrapping the blood-stained bandages. As the fabric fell away, she could see the full extent of his injuries. A knife wound just below his ribs, stitched closed but angry and red. A bullet grazed along his shoulder. Bruises that painted his torso in shades of purple and black. It looks worse than it is, he said, noticing her expression. It looks like someone tried to kill you. She cleaned the wounds with gentle efficiency, hyper-aware of his skin under her hands, the way his breathing changed when she touched sensitive areas. Were you wearing a vest? Always. It saved my life, but the knife got through. His voice was steady, but she could feel the slight tremor in his muscles as she worked. You have good hands. Gentle. The compliment made her skin flush warm. I took care of my grandmother before she died. Cancer. I'm sorry. She was ready. Said she'd lived long enough to see me grow up strong and smart, and that was all she'd prayed for. Zara secured the fresh bandage, then reached for the shirt, arms up. He raised his arms carefully, and she slipped the silk over his head, trying not to notice the way the fabric clung to his chest, the expensive scent that was purely him, sandalwood and cedar and something darker. I can handle the rest, he said when she reached for the slacks. Don't be ridiculous. You can barely lift your arms without wincing. She helped him stand, steadying him when he swayed slightly. His hands gripped her shoulders, and for a moment they were face to face, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. Zara, he said softly. We have rules, remember? But she didn't step away, didn't break the connection between them. Rules are meant to be broken, not these ones. But her voice was breathless, unconvincing. When he lifted one hand to cup her cheek, she didn't pull away. Instead, she found herself leaning into the touch, her eyes closing as his thumb traced along her cheekbone. We shouldn't, she started. I know! But neither of them moved. The air between them was charged, dangerous, full of possibilities that could destroy them both. She could feel her resolve weakening, could imagine what it would be like to kiss him, to let him pull her closer, to forget about power and danger and all the reasons why this was impossible. The sound of the elevator arriving shattered the moment. They broke apart quickly, Zara stepping back and reaching for his slacks with hands that shook slightly. Your father, she said, unnecessarily. Jae-sung nodded, his expression shifting back to controlled composure, but she could see the way his hands clenched into fists, could feel the regret radiating from him as he let her help him finish dressing. By the time Yoon-dae-jin entered the bedroom, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, radiating the quiet authority that had built an empire, his son was seated in the armchair by the window, looking every inch the leader despite his injuries. Father. Jae-sung. The older man's gaze flicked to Zara, taking in her presence with a slight frown. Who is this? Miss Brooks. She's been helping with my care. I see. Leave us. It wasn't a request. Zara bowed slightly and headed for the door, but not before catching the look that passed between father and son, less a complex mixture of love and disappointment and expectations that weighed more than any physical injury. From the sitting room, she could hear fragments of their conversation, voices raised in argument, then lowered to dangerous whispers, words like weakness and succession and temporary leadership that made her stomach clench with understanding. They were questioning whether Jae-sung was still fit to inherit the organization. The attack hadn't just wounded him physically, it had damaged his reputation, made him look vulnerable in a world where perception was everything. When the older man left, an hour later, Jae-sung called for her immediately. She found him standing by the window, staring out at the city that sprawled below like a kingdom. His shoulders were rigid with barely controlled fury. "How much did you hear?" he asked, without turning around. "Enough!" "Then you know that my position is precarious. The family council will meet tomorrow to discuss leadership during my recovery. There are those who would prefer that recovery take a very long time. What will you do?" "What I have to do." He turned to face her, and she saw steel in his expression that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to identify the traitor who set up the attack. I'm going to eliminate the threats to my leadership, and I'm going to prove that injury doesn't equal weakness. And if you can't,
Then I'll lose everything my family has built for 3 generations.
His voice was matter-of-fact, but she could hear the weight of that possibility, including the right to make my own choices about who I want in my life. The implication hung between them like a challenge. In his world, personal desires were luxuries that leaders couldn't afford. If he lost power, he would have nothing to offer her but danger. If he kept it, she would remain forever forbidden. "Zara," he said softly, "what I said earlier about rules being meant to be broken." "Don't!" "I need you to know that whatever happens, these past 24 hours have meant more to me than—" "Jae-sung, stop." She moved closer, close enough to see the vulnerability he was trying to hide behind determination. "Don't say things that will make this harder than it already is." "Harder?" She reached up and touched his face, letting herself have this one moment of honesty. "Do you think I don't feel it too? This thing between us? Do you think it's easy for me to maintain professional distance when all I want to do is—" "What?" His voice was rough, urgent. "What do you want to do?"
Things that will get us both killed, she whispered.
He caught her hand, pressing her palm flat against his cheek. "Tell me. I want to kiss you. I want to touch you without the excuse of medical care. I want to forget about who you are and who I am, and what world we live in." The words came out in a rush, 5 years of suppressed awareness finally breaking free. "I want to be the person you turn to, not because you need help, but because you want me there." "Zara." "But we can't. You know we can't." For a moment, she thought he was going to argue, going to close the distance between them and damn the consequences. Instead, he released her hand and stepped back, and she saw the exact moment he chose duty over desire. "You're right," he said quietly. "We can't." But as she left his room that evening, neither of them believed it. The attempt on his life had been just the beginning. Over the next week, as Jae-sung slowly regained his strength, the attacks became more subtle but no less dangerous. Rumors about his fitness to lead spread through the organization like poison. Key allies began hedging their bets, taking meetings with potential successors. Business deals that required his personal approval were quietly delayed.
Someone was orchestrating a campaign to undermine his authority, using his injury as proof that the Yoon family needed new blood.
"It's Lee Tae-ho," Jae-sung told Zara, as she helped him review financial reports in his study. His mobility was improving daily, but he still tired easily, and the stress of fighting enemies on multiple fronts was wearing on him. "My cousin. He's been working behind the scenes, convincing people that a wounded leader is a liability." "Can you prove it?" "Not yet, but I will." He looked up from the papers, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes that had nothing to do with physical pain. "He's scheduled to visit tomorrow, to check on my progress and discuss transitional leadership arrangements." Translation: to force Jae-sung to step aside voluntarily or face a family council vote that might strip his authority permanently. "What do you need me to do?" Zara asked. The question surprised them both. She'd meant to offer practical help, managing his schedule, screening visitors, handling communications. But the way he looked at her made it clear he understood something deeper in her offer. "You're willing to fight this battle with me?" "I told you I'd help you recover."
Recovery means getting your life back, doesn't it?
He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. This isn't just about medical care anymore. No, she said honestly, it's not. If you stand with me now, if you help me expose the conspiracy, there's no going back to invisibility. People will know you matter to me. That makes you a target.
I'm already a target just by being here.
Zara, he reached for her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. What are we doing? The question encompassed everything. The careful touches that lasted too long, the conversations that went deeper than they should, the way they'd begun orbiting each other like binary stars caught in an inevitable gravitational pull.
Something dangerous, she whispered. Something impossible.
Something that feels more real than anything else in my life. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was intimate, tender, full of promises neither of them could make. When this is over, he said against her skin, when I've secured my position and eliminated the threats, Abradst 014. When this is over, you'll marry the daughter of another crime family and I'll go back to cleaning floors. That's how this world works. What if I don't want it to work that way?
Then you'll destroy everything your family built for a woman they'll never accept, and I'll be the reason the Yoon Empire falls.
The truth of it hung between them like a blade. In any other world, their growing feelings might have been beautiful, worthy of pursuit. In this world, love was a weakness that enemies could exploit, a crack in armor that could bring down an entire organization.
I should go, Zara said, but she didn't move to leave.
Stay.
Jae-sung.
Just for tonight. Help me prepare for tomorrow's meeting. After that, if you want to return to your regular duties, I'll understand.
She should have said no. Should have walked out and restored the professional boundaries that were the only thing keeping them both safe. Instead, she found herself nodding, sealing her fate with a single word.
Okay.
They worked until midnight, strategizing about Lee Tae-ho's likely arguments, preparing counterpoints that would demonstrate Jae-sung's continued fitness for leadership. But as the hours passed, the space between them seemed to shrink. His hand would brush hers as they reached for the same document. She would lean closer than necessary to point out details in the financial reports. The air grew charged with unspoken desire and carefully controlled tension. You should get some sleep, she finally said, when she noticed him rubbing his temples. Tomorrow will be difficult. Will you stay nearby, in case I need anything during the night? It was a reasonable request. He was still recovering, still vulnerable to infection or complications. There was nothing inappropriate about her maintaining her caregiver role. But they both knew that wasn't why he was asking.
The sitting room, she said.
Like before. Like before, he agreed. But when she moved to leave, he caught her wrist gently. Zara? She turned back, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Want and longing and something deeper, something that looked dangerously like love. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes next, I need you to know that these days with you have been the most honest of my entire life. You see me as I am, not as what I represent. That's a gift I never expected to receive. The words hung between them, beautiful and terrible, and far too honest for safety. She should have deflected, should have returned to professional distance. Instead, she moved closer, close enough to smell his cologne, to see the way his pulse beat rapidly at his throat. Jae-sung, she whispered. Tell me to stop, he said softly, his hands coming up to frame her face. Tell me this is a mistake, and walk away.
But she couldn't. Instead, she found herself rising on her toes, closing the distance between them, with inevitability that felt like gravity.
When their lips met, the kiss was soft, tentative, full of question marks and careful exploration. But as she responded, as her hands fisted in his shirt and pulled him closer, it deepened into something hungry and desperate and completely consuming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jae-sung pressed his forehead against hers. We shouldn't be doing this, Zara whispered, echoing her own words from days ago. "I know," he said, his hands still cupping her face like she was something precious, "but I can't bring myself to care anymore." Neither could she, and that, she realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. She woke the next morning to the sound of shouting from the main floor. Zara had fallen asleep in the sitting room chair, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her dreams full of the memory of Jae-sung's hands in her hair and the taste of his kiss.
The argument below was escalating. Multiple male voices raised in anger, the kind of confrontation that in this house usually ended with someone bleeding. She found Jae-sung already dressed in an expensive suit, standing by his bedroom window with his phone pressed to his ear. His expression was grim, and when he saw her, he ended the call abruptly.
"What's happening?" she asked. Lee Tae-ho arrived early, with 3 family council members. They're demanding an emergency meeting about my fitness to lead. His voice was controlled, but she could see fury in the rigid line of his shoulders. "It's a coup attempt." "Can they do that? Remove you without your father's consent?" "If they can prove I'm incapacitated or mentally unfit, yes. They're claiming my judgment has been compromised by my injuries, that I'm making irrational decisions. Like keeping an unauthorized woman in his private quarters. Like trusting a maid with sensitive family business." The implications were clear. Somehow, they knew about her presence here, and they were using it as evidence of his diminished capacity. "Someone's been watching us," she said quietly. "Yes. The question is who, and what exactly they think they saw." Zara felt ice form in her stomach. If they had evidence of last night, if someone had witnessed their kiss or recorded their conversations, it wouldn't just end Jae-sung's leadership, it would likely end her life. "You need to go," he said, confirming her fears. "Immediately. Pack your things and leave the estate before—"
No!
"Zara, you don't understand. If they have proof of our relationship, they'll use it to destroy both of us. I won't let you pay for my weakness."
Your weakness?
She stepped closer, anger flaring bright and hot. "Is that what you think this is? A weakness?"
In this world, yes. Love is a luxury I can't afford, and getting involved with you was selfish and dangerous and—
Stop!
She reached up and touched his face, the same gesture that had led to their first kiss. "Don't you dare call this selfish. Don't minimize what's between us, to make it easier to walk away." He caught her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "Then what would you call it?" "The bravest thing either of us has ever done." So, for a moment, his composure cracked, and she saw the man beneath the careful control, someone who'd spent his entire life doing what was expected, following rules written by others, sacrificing personal happiness for family obligation. "If I fight this," he said quietly, "if I refuse to step down, it means war within the organization, blood in the streets, people will die. And if you don't fight, if you let them force you out, then someone else makes the decisions. Someone who might not value the things I value, who might not protect the people I want to protect, including her." The unspoken understanding passed between them. His leadership was the only thing standing between her and the kind of enemies who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a perceived threat. "Then we fight," she said simply. "We? You think I'm going to run now, when you need someone you can trust absolutely?" She smiled, and she saw her determination reflected in his eyes. "Besides, if they're going to use our relationship against you anyway, we might as well make it worth the price." He studied her face, searching for signs of fear or doubt. Instead, he found the same steel that had kept her at his bedside when everyone else had fled. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we do this, once we stand together publicly, there's no going back." "I'm sure." He nodded slowly, and she watched him transform from uncertain man to decisive leader. The change was subtle, but complete shoulders straightening, expression hardening into the mask of controlled authority she'd seen him wear in business meetings. "Then let's go remind them who they're dealing with." They descended to the main floor together, Jae-sung moving with only a slight stiffness to betray his recent injuries. Zara walked beside him, not behind like a servant, but as someone who belonged there. The message would be unmistakable to anyone who understood the subtle languages of power and alliance. The confrontation was waiting in the formal dining room. Lee Tae-ho and three older men in expensive suits, all standing around the table like judges, preparing to deliver a verdict. They looked up in surprise when Jae-sung entered with Zara at his side. "Cousin," Jae-sung said pleasantly, "I understand you wanted to discuss my recovery progress." Among other things, Tae-ho's gaze flicked to Zara with obvious disdain. "Perhaps we could speak privately."
Miss Brooks will be staying. She's been integral to my recovery and my recent strategic planning.
The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. One of the council members, Park Min-sik, a man who'd served the family for 30 years, stepped forward. "Jae-sung, we're concerned about your judgment. Your father asked us to evaluate your fitness for continued leadership, and frankly, some of your recent decisions raise questions. Such as
allowing unauthorized personnel access to sensitive family business. Such as making strategic decisions without consulting the proper channels. Such as
Min-sik's gaze moved deliberately to Zara.
Inappropriate personal relationships that compromise your position.
The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Jae-sung's expression didn't change, but Zara could feel tension radiating from him like heat. "I'm curious," he said calmly. "What evidence do you have of inappropriate relationships?" "We have reports from household staff, observations of compromising situations, enough to raise serious concerns about your judgment and priorities." "Reports from which household staff?" Jae-sung's voice remained level, but Zara heard the danger beneath it. "I'd like to know who's been monitoring my private quarters." The men exchanged glances, and Zara realized they'd walked into a trap. By admitting they'd been spying on him, they'd revealed the conspiracy went deeper than simple concern for his recovery. "The method of information gathering is irrelevant," Tae-ho said quickly. "The point is that your behavior since the attack has been erratic, compromised by personal feelings that have no place in family leadership." "Personal feelings." Jae-sung repeated the words thoughtfully. "You mean like loyalty? Like protecting the people who've proven their worth? Like ensuring the organization is led by someone who understands that power without honor is just thuggery?" He moved closer to the table, and despite his recent injuries, every man in the room took a step back. The aura of controlled violence that made him so effective as a leader was fully present now. "Let me be very clear about something," he continued softly. "Miss Brooks risked her life to help me identify the traitor who set up my assassination. While my own captains were positioning themselves to inherit my territory, she was working to ensure I survived long enough to reclaim it. While you were spreading rumors about my fitness to lead, she was helping me gather evidence of the conspiracy against me." Zara felt her breath catch. He was turning their relationship into a strategic alliance, reframing their forbidden attraction as calculated protection of a valuable asset. "Evidence?" Min-sik looked uncertain now. "What evidence?" Jae-sung smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. "Miss Brooks, would you show them what we've discovered?" She moved to the sideboard, where she'd placed a folder that morning, her hands steady, despite the magnitude of what was happening. Inside were documents they'd compiled over the past week. Luke 1 financial records showing unusual payments, communication logs revealing coordination between Lee Tae-ho and rival families, proof that the attack on Jae-sung had been orchestrated from within. As the men read, their faces grew pale. "This is fabricated," Tae-ho said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The bank records are real. The communication logs are authenticated. The witness statements are notarized." Jae-sung's voice carried the quiet satisfaction of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "You've been selling information to our rivals for months, setting up the conditions for my assassination so you could take control of the organization."
You can't prove!
I can prove all of it. The question is whether you want this resolved quietly within the family or whether you'd prefer I turn the evidence over to our contacts in law enforcement. The threat was clear. In their world, being exposed to law enforcement was often worse than death. It meant abandoning honor codes that had governed their operations for generations. "What do you want?" Min-jae asked quietly. "I want Lee Tae-ho removed from all family business permanently. I want the council members who supported this coup attempt to submit their resignations. And I want formal acknowledgement that my judgment and leadership are beyond question." "And the woman?" Jae-sung looked at Zara, and she saw something shift in his expression. The careful strategy fell away, replaced by raw honesty. "Miss Brooks will be taking an expanded role in our operations. She's proven herself more loyal and capable than people who've been with us for decades. Her judgment is excellent, her discretion is absolute, and her counsel is valuable to me." It wasn't a declaration of love, but in their world, it was something more powerful. A public statement that she had his protection, his trust, and his respect.
This is unprecedented, one of the other council members protested.
"So was the attempt on my life. So was the conspiracy to remove me from leadership. Unprecedented times call for unprecedented solutions." Jae-sung's voice carried final authority. "The matter is closed."
As the men filed out, defeated and diminished, Tae-ho paused by the door.
"This isn't over," he said quietly. "You're right," Jae-sung replied. "It is. If I see you in Seoul again, if you contact anyone in this organization, if you so much as drive past a business we own, I'll make sure you disappear permanently." After they were alone, Zara sank into one of the dining room chairs, adrenaline leaving her shaky. "Is it really over?" she asked. "The immediate threat? Yes, but there will be others. There always are." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from his body. "Are you prepared for that? For a life where danger is always a possibility?" She thought about her small apartment, her quiet existence, the simple life she'd built on the margins of his dangerous world. Then she looked at him, this complex, powerful man who'd chosen to protect her, even when it could have cost him everything. "I've been living in danger for 5 years," she said. "I just didn't admit it to myself. And now? Now I'd rather face it with you than hide from it alone." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with the naturalness of a gesture they'd performed 1,000 times before. "There's something you should know," he said softly, "about what happens next." "What?" "In about 6 months, my father will start pressuring me to consider marriage, an alliance with another family, someone who can strengthen our position politically." Zara felt her heart clench, but she kept her expression steady. "I see. I plan to tell him that I've already chosen someone who's proven her loyalty, her intelligence, and her courage, someone who sees the man I am, not just the position I hold." She stared at him, not daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're talking about marriage," she said, carefully. "I'm talking about building a life with the woman I love, if she'll have me." The words hung between them, beautiful and impossible, and completely sincere. In any other world, this would be the moment where music swelled and credits rolled. But in their world, love was still dangerous, still complicated by power and politics and the expectations of others. "Your family will never accept me," she said. "Then they'll learn to, or they'll lose me permanently. The other organizations will adapt, or find themselves dealing with someone much less reasonable than I am." She studied his face, searching for signs of doubt or political calculation. Instead, she found only certainty and something that looked remarkably like peace. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You'd risk everything for this? For us?" "Zara," he said, bringing their joined hands to his lips. "I already have." When he kissed her this time, it was different from their first desperate embrace. This kiss was a promise, a choice, a declaration that some things were worth more than power or safety or the approval of others. When they broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Zara realized that somewhere in the midst of recovery and conspiracy and impossible attraction, they'd stopped being a mafia boss and a maid. They'd become something new entirely. Something dangerous. Something impossible. Something that felt exactly like forever. 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 6 months later, Zara woke up in silk sheets in a penthouse overlooking Seoul, wearing a diamond engagement ring that had belonged to Jae-sung's grandmother, and the knowledge that she was loved completely by a man who'd chosen her over everything else. The organization had adapted to their partnership with surprising grace. It turned out that loyalty was valued more highly than tradition, and Zara's role in exposing the conspiracy had earned her respect that transcended social boundaries. The other families had raised eyebrows but accepted the reality that Yoon Jae-sung's judgment was not subject to their approval. His father had been the biggest surprise. After an initial period of resistance, he'd quietly acknowledged that anyone strong enough to save his son's life and clever enough to help him reclaim power was probably exactly the kind of person the family needed. Any regrets? Jae-sung asked from beside her, their morning ritual. Zara looked out at the city sprawling below them, at the life they'd built together from impossible beginnings and dangerous choices. About falling in love with someone who could have gotten me killed? About choosing danger over safety? About believing that some rules are meant to be broken? Yes! She turned to find him watching her with the same intensity that had first made her breath catch, the same careful attention that had turned medical care into something deeper. Not one, she said, and meant it. Outside, Seoul hummed with morning energy. Inside, they had coffee and each other, and the quiet certainty that love was sometimes worth any price, even when that price was everything you'd once thought mattered. After all, some boundaries were meant to be crossed, some rules were made to be broken, and some love stories were worth burning the world for.